At some point on your journey of awakening, following a profound spiritual insight or the gentle disintegration of a personal identity, you sensed the very ground give way beneath you. That which was once familiar felt alien. You saw beyond the curtain of illusion, recognized the mechanics of your own patterns, heard the overwhelming noise of the world, and then discovered the silence. At first, this silence seemed sacred, even empowering, like escaping a burning structure into fresh, clean air. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, meaning began to fade. Not in a sudden crash, but as a quiet vanishing, as though your soul had turned down the lights on existence and neglected to switch them back on. You ceased striving, you ceased performing, not from a place of hopelessness, but from a kind of divine weariness, an emptying that was strangely serene yet unnervingly motionless. And then the whisper started, a soft, aching inquiry. Why do I feel so hollow now that I am finally seeing things as they are? This is the contradiction that nobody prepares you for. We are conditioned to think that a spiritual awakening will ignite our sense of purpose, that seeing past illusion will make us blaze with clarity. Yet for many, particularly the sensitive souls, the questers, the empaths, and the introspective travelers, it prompts something different. It empties out the container. It scours away every false motivation until the very concept of desire becomes alien. And within that emptiness, we mistake awakening for apathy. I remember a discussion with a close friend. She was brilliant, spiritually sensitive, and well-versed in the writings of Eckhart Tolle, Krishnamurti, and Alan Watts. She had surfaced from a dark night of the soul with a crystalline understanding. She explained to me how she saw past the illusions of identity, success, and external validation, love. And yet, 2 months later, I discovered her in bed, gazing at the ceiling, adrift in a stillness she had never anticipated. I used to weep about not accomplishing enough, she told me. Now I don't mind if I accomplish nothing at all. I believed awakening would ignite a fire in me. Instead, I feel as if I've been snuffed out. Carl Jung addressed this specific threshold. He defined it as the sacred territory between the ego's collapse and the self's emergence, a liminal space, frightening in its silence, where motivation previously fueled by the persona and societal praise dissolves, leaving behind only the unformed clay of what is yet to come. This is not a failure. It is individuation, the chrysalis phase of the psyche where the caterpillar liquefies into formlessness before it can become the butterfly. It represents the psychological death necessary for a rebirth. However, we must be careful not to misinterpret this void as a step backward, because in the center of this emptiness resides a more profound calling, a quiet rhythm of soul truth awaiting our attention. Not the drive to prove oneself, but the impulse to simply be, to act not from a craving for acknowledgement, but from an internal resonance. This piece is not about hopelessness. It is about that moment after awakening when the old fuel source has expired, and the new one is still taking shape. Jung knew that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This loss of motivation is not an ending. It is the sacred start of living, not as a mask, but as a soul. Carl Jung, the architect of analytical psychology, anticipated this peculiar and silent fog that can fall after an awakening, long before it was discussed in contemporary spiritual forums. He didn't wrap it in mysticism or blissful rhetoric. He spoke with incisive clarity about the soul's journey into its own depths. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, Jung once wrote. While those words may sound lyrical, they contain a formidable truth. Genuine awakening doesn't bestow you with a crown of bliss. It strips you bare. It dismantles the entire framework of the false self. It sets in motion a gradual and sacred death, the death of the person you thought you were. The breakdown is internal, yet its effects are extensive. Your previous motivations, ambition, accomplishment, recognition, start to fade. The timelines you adhered to, the objectives that once propelled you, and even the identity structures that shaped your relationships, your career, and your daily life begin to dissolve like mirages under the light of a deeper reality. But this is where the psychological distinction is crucial. Your ego does not vanish. It doesn't perish. It just becomes disoriented. The script it was accustomed to following has been incinerated, but a new one has not yet been written. The outcome is not laziness or apathy, but a deep spiritual limbo. You are no longer asleep, but you are not yet fully awake to what lies ahead. This is the enigma, what Jung termed the nigredo, the blackening stage of alchemy, when the ego has been deconstructed, but the self has not yet assumed the throne. In modern language, it appears as demotivation, but in Jungian terms, it is a holy pause, an in-between space where the soul withdraws inward to compose a new myth. And yet our culture is terrified of this silence. Jung warned that the modern world does everything in its power to sidestep this phase, to pathologize it, numb it, and medicate it, because it cannot grasp a transformation that doesn't resemble progress. But what you are going through is not regression. It is an initiation. It is not dysfunction. It is a sacred descent. This is not clinical depression, although it may share some of its shadows. It is the soul refusing to engage in a life with which it no longer aligns, and that, Jung believed, was the start of individuation, the sacred becoming of the true self. Most people don't talk about this part, do they? The ache that follows the light, the silence that comes after the revelation. But this silence is not hollow, it is formative. And if you can learn to be still within it, to heed what it requires of you, you may begin to realize that what appears to be demotivation is actually the start of a more profound alignment. The world may tell you that you are lost. Jung would suggest you are being reformed by something far more authentic. And that is precisely what we will start to explore next. If you have been wandering through the haze that comes after awakening, gazing into the stillness where your spark once shone brightly, understand this. You are not broken. You are undergoing a profound psychic shift for which our culture has no vocabulary, a metamorphosis so deep it doesn't just challenge your beliefs, it reconfigures the very architecture of your psyche. The ambitions that once kindled a fire within you, the deadlines, the objectives, the 5-year plans, the motivational slogans of the hustle culture, they now seem meaningless. This is not because you have failed, but because the very foundation that once supported your motivation is dissolving. Carl Jung foresaw this unraveling long before it was ever mentioned on digital platforms. Let us grasp it with clarity. For the majority of your life, your energy was sourced from the persona, the constructed self, the mask you put on to navigate the world. That identity, the one that craved admiration, validation, and applause, was not a defect. It was an essential stage of human development. As Jung explained, the persona is a system of behavior which is imposed upon the individual by the expectations of society. But as you awaken, you start to see the mask for what it truly is, a performance. And that performance no longer holds any power over you. You cannot pursue applause once you realize the stage itself is an illusion. The consequence is that the goals you once held in high regard now feel alien. They were authored by a self that is no longer you. This gives rise to a strange quietness inside, like an actor who has walked off stage and forgotten their lines, not from bewilderment, but because the script no longer aligns with their soul. You feel directionless, not because you have lost your way, but because you have shed the identity that needed a destination. You haven't lost your drive. You have outgrown the fuel that once sustained it. What is stirring inside you now is not an absence, but a sacred pause, a quiet emptiness, preparing to be filled by something more authentic, something no longer built from performance, but from presence. The ego pushed, the soul waits, and in that waiting, something holy is beginning. Carl Jung held that the purpose of life is not to glorify the ego, but to integrate it into a larger, more profound psychic whole. We are not here to cater to the ego's whims, but to refine it, temper it, and bring it into alignment with the self, the transcendent core of our being that links us to the greater reality. He named this process individuation, the lifelong journey from fragmentation toward inner wholeness. The aim is not to become the self that is celebrated, but to become the self that is real. The self, unlike the ego, is not concerned with approval or performance. It is not motivated by ambition, but by alignment. Its sole desire is to give expression to what is true. And so, after a spiritual awakening, the psyche undertakes a sacred recalibration. What once seemed exciting now feels empty. Your system starts to reject everything that is artificial, forced, or inauthentic. This includes careers built on insecurity, relationships founded on roles, or even the vision board you assembled from your old self's fear of not being adequate. This inner cleansing often feels like both liberation and disorientation. You are shedding what is false, but what will take its place. Jung warned that many become stuck at this point. Some awaken and then fall into spiritual bypassing, confusing transcendence with avoidance. They float above their lives, label everything an illusion, and persuade themselves that nothing is important. But detachment is not equivalent to disconnection. The self does not want you to vanish from the world. It wants to live in the world through you. It desires to incarnate, not evacuate. It seeks embodiment, not withdrawal. But preceding that embodiment is a threshold, and Jung described it perfectly, though few see it for what it is while they are in it. It is the gray area after awakening, the void that arrives not with euphoria but with confusion. It does not appear poetic. It does not go viral. It looks like sitting quietly as the world rushes by, unable to articulate who you are in the process of becoming. Jung would say, "You are not failing, you are in between. You have stepped out of the ego, but the self has not yet become your foundation." This liminal space is not an error. It is an initiation, a descent into the unknown for which modern culture has no tolerance. Stillness is misidentified as laziness, a pause mistaken for paralysis. So you start to criticize yourself, and that criticism becomes the very barrier blocking the energy your soul is calling forth. This phase is sacred. It is chrysalis, not collapse. And if you can remain here long enough, if you can fight the impulse to rush ahead or pull back, you will start to feel it, the quiet rhythm of something deeper emerging. The self is not loud, but it is constant, and it is waiting for you to trust what cannot yet be put into words. Carl Jung had a term for this sacred reversal of energy, enantiodromia, the principle that anything taken to an extreme will transform into its opposite. And this is nowhere more apparent than in the aftermath of awakening. You shift from the frantic striving of the ego, I must do everything, to the hollow stillness of the soul, why do anything at all? The pendulum swings not because you are defective, but because balance requires it. The psyche, long held captive by performance, finally gives way to rest. And this descent is not a pathology. It is an initiation. In the lexicon of myth, this is the archetype of the hermit, the retreat from the world that precedes rebirth. It is the sacred cocoon where the caterpillar dissolves into formlessness, no longer a crawling creature and not yet a flying one. It is the goo phase, unstructured, undefined, and unproductive by all modern metrics, but essential because the psyche is undergoing an alchemical transformation. And transformation, Jung would argue, starts in darkness, not in bypassing, not in good vibes only, but in descent. This is often where modern spirituality loses its substance, by romanticizing awakening while sidestepping its crucifixion. Jung was adamant that the shadow, the rejected, uncomfortable, and unconscious aspects of our being is not something to be evaded, but something to be integrated. Shadow work is not an advanced practice in spirituality. It is the very groundwork of becoming whole. And in the state of nothingness you now find yourself in, the unconscious is emerging, not as an antagonist, but as a messenger. What you have long suppressed, your sorrow, your anger, your unfulfilled needs, begins to come to the surface because now, finally, there is room. So the ego panics. It demands action, clarity, a label. But the self quietly and unyieldingly whispers, let go. I am creating something deeper. And this is the point where the true work starts, not in accomplishment, but in surrender. Not in clarity, but in witnessing. The psyche is not broken. It is metabolizing years of noise, illusion, and false effort. It brings your drive, your ambition, and your hunger to a halt, so that you have no option but to sit with what you have buried. And it is in that stillness, in that haunting void, and then, almost without notice, something begins to move. A new kind of motivation comes forth, but it is entirely different from the old one. It is not born from anxiety. It is not rushed or theatrical. It does not roar. It hums. It is a soul-led impulse to act, not because you have to, but because it would be a betrayal of truth not to. Jung referred to this as the emergence of the self, not as some abstract concept, but as a living, breathing compass inside you. It does not chase, it calls. And what it calls you toward is not success, but wholeness. So you have passed the threshold and stood within the silence. You have experienced stillness not as inertia, but as a sacred pause. You have roamed through the internal night, where no voice called to you and no light illuminated the path. And now something ancient is beginning to awaken, not with a roar, not like a bolt of lightning, but as a quiet inner knowing. A gentle pulse that does not compel you to go back to what was, but invites you to construct what has never been. This is the initial whisper of the self, conveyed not through language, but through feeling, through a pull, through presence. Carl Jung named this the symbolic life, a life no longer governed by the ego or social norms, but directed by the deeper energies of the soul. Once the ego has yielded and the unconscious has been honored, life is no longer a game of survival, but an unfolding of meaning. And herein lies the paradox. It can appear beautifully mundane. When the self starts to take the lead, you no longer hustle. You respond. You are not propelled by the fear of missing out, but by the quiet certainty of inner alignment. you cease pursuing clarity like a trophy and start to recognize it when it shows up, often disguised as simplicity. Living from the self doesn't guarantee you will always feel energetic or confident. Fatigue, doubt, and sorrow will still visit. This is the fabric of a human existence. But what vanishes is the persistent ache of self-betrayal, the weary exhaustion of playing a version of yourself that is no longer authentic. Instead, something changes. You find yourself creating even when there is no applause. You say no, even when yes is the expected answer. You follow a sense of wonder rather than checking off. You begin to prioritize peace over performance. This is not lethargy. It is a new kind of fuel, not adrenaline, but alignment, not pressure, but presence. Jung called this living symbolically, not as a flight into fantasy, but as a return to the soul. You start to trust the language of dreams, intuitive feelings, symbols, and synchronicities. Your life transforms into a dialogue, not a monologue yelled into emptiness, but a conversation with the unseen. And what does that entail? Sometimes it is as simple as asking different questions, not what should I do, but what is gently calling to me, not what is the plan, but where is life guiding me, not how can I prove my worth, but what feels true. You stop trying to control life and start to participate with it. Ambition doesn't disappear. It is redefined. It becomes devotion. Devotion to what is real, what is true, what makes you feel alive. And remarkably, that devotion can move mountains. It accomplishes things, but from a place of wholeness, not depletion. Now it is sustainable. Now it is soul-powered. This is the self's motivation, not to impress, but to express. And it guides you, often effortlessly, to create, to teach, to heal, and to serve. Not because you are supposed to, but because your entire being resonates with a yes. So if you have been asking where your spark went after awakening, remember, it has not vanished. The old fire had to die out so that a deeper flame could rise, one that will not be extinguished by the storms of the world. Carl Jung never guaranteed ease, but he did promise depths. If you are here reading these words, then you are already on the path. This is not the conclusion of your awakening. It is the start of your becoming. If something in this message resonated with you, if even one phrase reflected your own inner experience, I encourage you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you met that soul whose presence feels like coming home, or are you still on the sacred journey back to yourself? Your story, no matter how incomplete, could serve as a light in another person's darkness, the very signal they did not realize they were seeking. And if a person close to you is quietly contending with the illusion that love is supposed to hurt, that self-sacrifice is the cost of connection, or that they are not deserving of peace, please share this video with them. Help me connect with those who need to be reminded that real love does not require us to diminish ourselves. True connection does not ask for the sacrifice of our soul. And the most crucial union we will ever forge is the one with our own inner truth. Before you leave, I invite you to subscribe and click the notification bell. Here in this space, we venture beneath the surface of things, examining the hidden framework of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and the way every relationship is simply a mirror that reflects our own personal evolution. If there is a particular theme, question, or wound you wish for us to delve into in future videos, please leave it below. This space is alive because of you. Your voice is not just welcome here, it is vital. Thank you for being present, not only for this video, but for your own inner work, for the sacred task of remembering who you truly are. And always hold this in your heart. When the right person comes along, Your soul will recognize them not through fear, but through peace. But until then, let your most profound relationship be the one you nurture within. That is the bedrock. That is the home. And from that wholeness, all genuine things are born. Until we meet again, I'll see you on the path.